Hi, this is Christopher Smith from the American Cannabis Report at PCM-TV, and I'm super fortunate today to have Mary Jane Oatman as my guest. Hi, Mary Jane. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's great to see you today. Thank you so much for coming. So I'm going to give just a little bit of background of things that I know, and I hope you'll help me fill in the blanks. Okay.
Okay.
So first of all, you're a member of the Perce tribe from Idaho. And what I've also learned is that you're a direct descendant of Chief Lookingglass.
Yes.
So I first have to express my incredible honor at having you here. I feel like you're royalty, really. He's a true hero to me. And it's just an amazing legacy that you have and that you're carrying forward. So thank you very much for all of that and for being here with me.
Well, himalchas katiyaya, piomsik kinawatis pa nunam watis pa, and I'm joining you all from, the Nez Perce homelands. And so it's an honor. And I appreciate that intro because it truly is a blessing to know the lineage that I come from, and then to have my cannabis peers actually have that recognition or know that history speaks volumes to your commitment to knowledge.
Well, I was amazed to find it. I was sort of jumping up and down. So I pity my neighbors downstairs. They've been hearing me jumping up and down all day. So now I also understand that you are the founder of the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition.
Yes,
Yeah.
So I founded the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition in May of 2019 because for a lot of the work that we're doing to eliminate the negative stigma for this very sacred plant medicine is education. It's just all rooted in education. And so
Sure.
The Indigenous Cannabis Coalition, protection of tribal sovereignty and the preservation of Indigenous story. And those stories are, very much a big part of the education needed to end that stigma.
Okay. Wow. Well, there's more I'd love to know about that and know what you're working on and what things are working, what things you hope to, accomplish. I also just want to mention quickly up front that I understand also you're the publisher of THC Magazine.
Yes. So THC Magazine is the education and advocacy component of the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition. It's our keystone, material that we get across Indian country to help eliminate that negative stigma through success stories that are happening throughout tribal communities through the reclamation of the medicine, as well as the economy that can come with cannabis development.
Okay. So real quickly though, THC doesn't stand for what we think it does, right? In your case, right?
Tribal hemp and cannabis. We cover all things THC, as in tribal hemp and cannabis.
There we go. Okay. So from that beginning, from that sort of foundation of the things that a person could find about you, Googling you and that kind of stuff, I would really like to learn a lot more about the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition. And I'd love to learn, you've told me when it began, and I'd really like to know what was the motivation for starting it, what was missing, what were perhaps your tribes or perhaps other tribes not connecting on, and there were opportunities that you saw. So I'd love to hear more about that development and where you are now.
Well, I've had a really amazing professional background. I served as the first director of our state's education system for tribes. So, Indian education during the Obama administration allowed and afforded me the opportunity to really grow and develop as a policy analyst for education. Education policy was like my life's work. And when I returned back home to the reservation in 2012, I was focused on my family. Little did I know that the Farm Bill was getting ready to get teed up and leave tribes out. And so that was a great deal of frustration for me because I had been raised, knowing the history of our people as not only as smoking people, but as very much textile fiber people. Our women have a genetic predisposition to this crooked tooth from making the rope. And we have this, since time immemorial history as rope makers. that's how we preserved our stories, as well as through the story knots. And so to see that schism in our culture, and then realizing that tribes were being left out of the economic opportunity for fiber build out within the farm bill was frustrating. So I shifted gears and started looking at more policy development for hemp and cannabis in my own community, as well as like what's going on at the national level. And that's when I realized that there was just not really a whole lot, or if it was happening in silos. But because I am so proactive in policy development and wanted to find ways that I could spread the message outward as well, build bridges with other organizations and communities. While I was serving as a legal bud tender in the state of Washington, I was invited by Jason Ortiz to serve on the Minority Cannabis Business Association Board of Directors. And so in 2017, serving with a diverse set of colleagues, I mean, some really amazing professionals, but within even that professional level of organization, there was little to no knowledge about protecting tribal sovereignty in cannabis legalization, which was, frustrating at times when it feels like you're doing, Indian Treaties 101 and why it's important, and then connecting it to the plant history as well. So that was one reason.
Wow, that's such an awful legacy to try to turn back and to try to make, I don't know if you can make it right ever what has been done, but moving forward, making it right and making people stick by what they promised to do.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I wanted to do it in the most positive spirit that I could. And I also realized that this is just getting started. We are like, I mean, not even in infancy, but like in utero with this cannabis industry, so to speak, because I come from that really rich legacy. And then the treaty chiefs bargaining for and negotiating our treaty over sacred smoke and that's a part of the government's records as well as our own oral traditions. And then fast forward to the early 80s and the like full out war on drugs, war on Mother Earth and communities. My grandma and grandpa went to federal prison for for cultivating here on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation. And so my grandma, who made the cover of Volume 1, Issue 1, was like the biggest reason why, when I realized if today as an Indigenous matriarch in my own homelands, I would probably be federally indicted for doing the exact same thing that grandma was doing. And so it was really at that moment where this was like a let Granny grow campaign in my heart, because metaphorically speaking, I would love for my grandmother to be able to go back out into her yard in the exact same plot and property where she had those 8 plants, that she went to prison for the first time, to be able to do that. But I'm here in Idaho. And so we have, the obstacles of the being federally illegal, and then the religious and political ideology that keeps it illegal in Idaho. That there's the internal, even within our own community, the negative stigma that we have to eliminate. And then at the larger level of building those bridges with the organizations that can help carry the water of Indian country forward with federal legalization.
Do you mind if I just pause for a minute and I just really would like to really paint a really more personal picture of your grandparents, just at that moment? Like, how old were they, for example, generally when all of this happened?
Oh, goodness. I think they were in their early 50s.
I see.
Late 40s. I mean, yeah, they were younger grandparents. Yeah.
Okay. And they didn't just come in and take the plants and sort of say, write them a ticket or something, but actually they sent them to prison.
Oh, no. I remember the day very vividly. So part of our, my being a young girl, I remember my mom and my grandpa were really, really close. So she consulted with him, quite a bit, spiritual consultation. I mean, they were just super tight. So we would go down and visit my grandpa every day. My mom and my grandpa would smoke together. My dad would be there with them quite a bit of the times. My uncles would be there with them. And my grandpa was non-native. And so
Okay.
he was not a member of the tribe, but my grandmother was the actual legal landowner. My grandpa's name was nowhere on the title, and my grandma was the cultivator from the beginning.
Okay.
She had always said, that they were her plants, but I think that at that time they really wanted to send the message, that this was zero tolerance. And so my grandfather was actually indicted in state court, not federal court. So he went to
Okay.
state prison, and my grandma went to federal prison, just to clarify that that's where those jurisdictional complexities kind of made things, a lot more complicated. Was they actually had no jurisdiction to convict my grandfather, even, try him in the first place. But my grandma always felt a lot of shame for what happened during that time, because in a little tiny reservation community, everybody knows everybody's business, and so we had to go to school and have the whole dare thing going on, where they're bringing in the McGruff, the crime dog, and going through that whole thing, and then before we had those notices, we'd be sitting at home, and my dad would tell us, they're going to tell you all of these things. That during that time, they actually did take kids away from parents over marijuana. So, we had to just, and say no and not answer specific questions. But I guess the crazy part about remembering all of that is, we're talking about my little old granny, and she's just growing like a little tiny medical grow. But
right in her yard, a little bit in the yard.
Yeah, so we showed up at the family's property just as the raid was going on, and so there was like full-on SWAT team, the bulletproof vests and the assault rifles, and there was like dozens of officers from multiple jurisdictions all over the properties. And they had the guns pointed at all of our vehicles, and it was quite the scene for a little grandma growing in Idaho, for sure.
That is so over the top. It's so horrible to hear that. I'm so sorry you went through that. All of you and your family. That's terrible.
My grandma, actually, she was sent to the Geiger Correctional Facility, because I remember going up to Spokane to go visit her quite frequently. And being a mother her whole life, and then just being the life that she lived of having as many kids as she did, my mom and her 6 brothers and sisters, and just growing up in some of the high poverty that she did, it was kind of a break for her. And it was so crazy to hear her say that, was that she made friends. And she really, she wasn't treated badly. She did have one really, really interesting situation that is talked about in the book, is that she was housed with one of the Aryan Nations factions.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. And she thought that maybe they were just doing that to just like mentally break her or something like that.
Sure. Oh my God, that's just so awful. I'm so sorry. I'm glad to share that sort of information, because I really think that people need to hear what it really means, and what the reality of it is on the ground, and how it affects elderly people, how it affects children. This is a radical behavior that you're working so hard to change.
So I just found that. So it was Jean Craig. She shared a bunk with Jean Craig, who was a member of the order, and she was incarcerated in the same prison as my grandmother for her role in the murder of Alan Berg, a prominent Jewish radio personality who was murdered in 1984. They shared a bunk together.
In Denver, that guy, yeah. Alan Berg was Denver, right? Yeah, I remember the story. They were in the same cell together, not only in the same cell block, but in the same cell.
Same bunk, yeah.
Oh my God. So that's really quite incredible. You mentioned another thing, Mary Jane, that I'd love to talk more about. And we talked a little bit about it. You mentioned different groups or different silos working apart, working separately, and sometimes even working against each other. And you're trying to counteract that. Now, is that within your own particular tribe, or is that within other tribes around the country? Or tell me a little bit more about bringing people together.
Yes, with the concept of the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition, it's everybody together having that conversation as tribal nations. As we look at it being federally illegal, one of the biggest obstacles there is the lack of being able to have interstate commerce in cannabis.
Sure.
And, tribes is a little bit different. We have our reservations, and then we have intertribal commerce, so, the dichotomy of things change, with the words that we use, and we have to be, really careful of our word choice in Indian country. But one of the saddest things, is to see a lot of these tribes just like lining up for compacting opportunities to, relinquish, taxes. And that can also be done in goodwill gestures through local MOUs and MOAs without having to compact with the state government and give away so much of, tax or sovereignty. But the reason that I say that is because under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, tribes were required to enter into those compacts with states prior to participating in regulated gaming. Well, tribes know what it's like to be highly regulated because they've been doing it for gaming. They created their own systems and own industry, in a sense, to be able to be compliant. And so the bar was raised really high. And not only did tribes, reach the bar, they raised it themselves. And I'm saying that we have the model of that, the compliance model, not the compacting model part of it, because tribes aren't required by the federal government to compact away taxes for cannabis. They're required to do what state systems are to do, make sure that minors are not getting access, creating safe, compliant regulations similar to what all of their systems are doing, under the Cole and Wilkinson guidelines. And so if tribes are doing that, which we see them doing, the tribe in Bay Mills operating in the state of Michigan with no compact, several several tribes throughout California doing the same thing. So there's the reality that, because of this all being so new, we've got all of these tribes in Washington that started out, and that was the model that they started out with, was the compacting model, which works really, really great in Washington state. But most of those tribes are not cultivating. They're participating in the state commerce and market, which, like I said, works for that tribe. What I don't want to see is a one size fits all model for tribes, kind of approach, because tribes are not monolithic. However, if we have an economy of scale with tribes that do want to work together in a sovereign cannabis model, that they start to do that and work together, create that infrastructure, and then the other tribes, can find their inroads to working within that intertribal commerce model. But the reality is, some of our tribal geographies, they're just not, meccas of cannabis cultivation. They would be building, high energy facilities in less than, I would hope that they would do it, in an eco-friendly, environmentally friendly fashion. But if we could entertain and participate more in a barter trade system, then, our tribes and cultivators and families that are doing so, that have done so for, thousands of years in Northern California, can then be supplying to communities that are not necessarily cannabis agriculture communities.
Well, you described the geography. Like, I know that the Navajo, for example, are I don't know if I want to say trying to get in or getting in to cannabis, but they live in a very serious desert with a serious drought. And then you'll have a tribe in New York State, for example, that has, completely opposite problem. They're in the farther northern area. So that means they have to have greenhouse and probably indoor, because they've got a very short growing season, but they've got all the water they could ever want, but they don't have the sun. So you've got all of those issues, right? And across the country, right?
Yes, and for them to be working together, for me on the front end, that's the towards the end of the race right now. It's really getting them working together to make sure that we are not left out in federal legalization language that is protective of tribal sovereignty, and that affords tribes an opportunity and doesn't put us at a disadvantage. And we have all of the history repeating itself with the farm bill. We could go with that, or we could look to the north with what happened with Canada's Cannabis Act, and what happened with the First Nations brothers and sisters up there. They were completely left out, to the point to where they had to develop their own red market industry. And I consult heavily with many of the First Nations self-regulated markets, because that's what they did. Was many of them were like, well, these are the challenges and obstacles that we have. We'll make fully vertically integrated companies, and they're going to be better than what any of these MSOs can do. And
Sure.
really just went all in and dealt with getting shut down and dealt with the legal system and just kept persevering. I mean, Legacy 420 in Tyandaga Mohawk is just, one of those prime examples of one of those communities that shares blood on both sides of the borders. They're going to have to figure it out.
I've never heard the term red market before.
Yes, red market is
white guy. White guy.
I don't I know that we don't always mirror the politics or even a lot of what happens up north in Canada, but for me it was just a lot of the even in building the infrastructure of the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition, they already had a national Indigenous Cannabis Medical Association that had started their conversation about, we have to be loud, we have to be vocal with the Canadian government, we have to make sure that we don't get left out. And despite them being politically active, despite them being very vocal to stand on the foot of sovereignty, they were still left out. And so that's what I have weighing on me with this sense of urgency, is that getting even the most, and that's kind of the approach that I'm working on, is I can work on getting a whole bunch of tribes saying the same thing, but if we get the most politically active cannabis tribes right now all saying the same thing, that message will kind of trickle back down.
There we go. Does it help at all having Deb Haaland in the place that she is? She's Interior, right?
Yes.
Secretary of Interior.
Yes,
right.
Secretary of Interior.
So step at a time.
Definitely a step at a time. Check out my website, www.indigenouscannabiscoalition.com. Deb has been a supporter of Tribal Hemp and Cannabis Magazine right out the gates.
Wonderful.
Really she propelled me at a time when I was like kind of questioning what I was doing. I was working a full-time job, single mom, and starting up the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition, knowing I was going to start up a magazine. But that was just like, it was a ghost magazine. I'm making all these sales calls. Nobody wants to buy ads for a ghost magazine. Right. I'm telling them it's going to be print, and they're like, print magazines?
What are you doing that for?
Dinosaurs. Yeah. And so I reached out. I don't even know where this came from. I think a part of it just came from just that instinct kicking in that, of how to leverage that political support and how to throw a kick butt party also. So Tribal Hemp and Cannabis Magazine was launched in February of 2020. I had the idea, as I was pulling this issue together, of hosting the launch party in Washington, D.C. during the National Congress of American Indians, which is happening right now. So we're like having a huge anniversary, if you will.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, I'm going to do the party. And so I reached out to a couple of my friends in the nonprofit world, and we were able to secure the King Weedy Mansion, which is a nonprofit collective in Washington, D.C. that opens up their space for fundraisers and events. And then I went to getting the invites out there and dubbed it as, the nation's first tribally elected cannabis mixer. And then I was like, oh,
awesome.
What am I doing? I got to get some people there. And so I actually reached out to Deb Haaland before I send out my invites.
Yeah.
And they confirmed that she would be a guest. And so I put that on my invites, and that really started helping getting some traction of putting out there that, Congresswoman Deb Haaland is going to be there. And so people are showing up at this event, and I check my phone as the event starts kicking off, and I got a message. I got a message from her staffer saying that she was going to not be able to make it, but she had made a video. And I was like, okay, well, that'll work. So one of my tech friends, AC Agoyo, who runs Indians news channel, which is an online digital news broadcast for Indian country. He had his iPhone there, and he's just like super smart, and he was able to beam the video onto the big screen TV at this collective. And so all of the party goers were able to gather around. And so the impact of it was absolutely amazing, because she gave her pro legalization, Indigenous woman power message to tribally elected leaders. And that video has gotten us so much traction since then. I mean, it would have been really phenomenal if she would have showed up, We have the video on our website. We recently released a petition to the Biden administration and Department of Justice to get them to reauthorize the Cole-Wilkinson memorandum. It's not enough to say that you supported it during your, political speech.
Right.
Jeff Sessions formally rescinded it. We need them to go back in there and formally show the agencies, give them the stand down, non-action, non-interference directives that need to happen to keep the federal raids from happening on homelands like the Picarillas Pueblo. In September of 2021, they had, a raid over a tribally approved state licensed medical cannabis cultivation on the Picarillas Reservation. It was a medical raid he had a tribal permit and a state permit for medical grow and was still raided by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So that happened under Deb Haaland's watch. And so, we are also urging her to, at the very least, issue an executive order memorandum within her agency for non-action for well-regulated cannabis, activity on tribal lands.
We are really supposed to be protected from that sort of nonsense. And I don't remember so Wilkinson. Is that related to the Cole memo? It's the same general, it sounds like the same idea, right? Which is that state regulated companies are protected from federal nonsense like this. Right?
Yeah, it was a thread of memorandums, and one of them just more specific guidelines for Indian country.
Oh, gotcha.
Again, getting left out. It's like, oh, okay, this is how you treat tribal communities as well.
Yeah, not okay. Wow. Well, good luck with pushing that forward. And I'll be happy to do anything I can to support the messaging on that. So we'll just stay in touch on that. I was noticing today, just as an example of how completely comprehensive and endemic racism is, this is like in the Olympics. There's this Russian skater, a girl, I think she's about 15 years old. She's a very good skater, but she was tested for a banned substance, and she's being allowed to go forward. And Sha'Carri Richardson in the last Olympics in the summer was pinched for having cannabis in her system, and she was sent home.
Yes. So
this little white Russian girl gets pushed forward, African-American woman gets pushed back, kind of thing. So it's every day, it's an assault, really.
Yeah, I was really frustrated to see that myself. I actually just caught that on the news this morning. That was the first thing it triggered me to, was that the disparity in the decision makers and what they will allow to move forward even as a substance. I thought, well, that's, there's doping, and then there's doping. No.
Right. Well, apparently, I guess that whatever it is that they determined that she has some heart thing, she says, but apparently the stuff that she was taking is a absolutely legit enhancer. It increases the volume of oxygen, increases the amount of blood. I mean, there's no question about that it is an enhancer. And I guess they're saying that she's a minor. So poor little thing, the poor little biscuit, she just didn't know a thing. So they're going to let her go through. But, so I posted the same thing today. I mean, just a picture of the two together side by side and say, you tell me what happened here.
So I appreciate that activism and that advocacy, because, most people don't even, a lot of folks are, they don't catch that kind of news, or they don't make those connections. And when they do, there's the different, I guess, channels of reactions. But what most people do is it triggers the compassion within them about, what Sha'Carri had went through. I know with the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition, we did, some public messaging as well around supporting Sha'Carri. And there's just definitely a lot of work to do. And it takes like, my life partner is non-native, and he is, there's situations where I think maybe because I am so desensitized to things, where he notices disparities probably a little bit more than I do.
Okay.
Because he's, because their lived experiences a lot of time for me, or I just don't like it. It just happens, I'm just kind of just jaded or used to it at times.
I think you can only have your heart broken so many times, probably, you know.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you just want to turn it off and go, I just can't anymore. I'm remembering too that as I was raising my sons, I have 3 sons who are all in their 20s now. But when they were little, I was noticing and looking around, like, for example, when I first took my oldest son skiing, he was probably 4 years old or so. And we went to Squaw Valley in Northern California. And it was when it, you know, you get these reality checks, you get these acknowledgments that, you know, the reality hits you. And driving in there and realizing what this was and what that said and how that was generally accepted. And of course, then you start doing the circuit around like the National Football League and baseball, and you start to point these things out. And so all during the upbringing of my kids, we had this conversation all the time. And as the Cleveland baseball team just changed its name, I sent them all a text. We win, you know, and the Washington football team finally, you know, came out of the Snyder family or whatever their deal is. They finally have turned things around and finally gotten rid of that name. So, I mean, little things are happening, but like I said, I've been in my tiny little way, just try to, you know, do the tiny little things that I can. I mean, I trying to share my storytelling ability, I suppose, if, you know, such as it is, to try to make things even.
That is what it is. A big part of it is, I think that many of us are on a repair journey or healing, and you know, a lot of it is even healing or repairing things like we didn't fix it, you know, but we want to see it fixed so that the next generation doesn't have to live, you know, with the dysfunction of it, just because, you know, we didn't buy into this, you know, it's not our mess, we're not going to clean it up mentality.
Right. But that's not what you're doing, though. You're saying it is on us, it is on me, and I'm going to take it on my shoulders, and I'm going to help push this forward. And I'm going to bring other people together who have had their hearts broken over and over and rally people together. I mean, I think what you're doing is incredible. I really do.
I appreciate that you say that. And the reason that is so important for me is because we do have, like, for me, it's a shared responsibility for Mother Earth. When we have opportunities to build this cannabis industry in a better way, instead of driven exclusively for profit, then we can do it better.
Yeah. You know, you and I have talked also about, I mean, there's the THC side, and then there's the sort of the industrial side, let's just say, right? There's the marijuana side and the hemp side. And you and I talked quite a bit about the hemp side and how that is so important to you, to your people. And, you know, like you said, with the tooth and the but it's not, you know, what I'm trying to point out is that we're not just talking about selling pot in smoke shops. It's way bigger than this, right? And I really want to keep emphasizing what we're really, really talking about.
So much bigger than that. I mean, like, that's the fun side of it. That's what pays the bills for THC Magazine to be able to exist, so that we can showcase the need for, you know, collaborative partnerships. There are some of our tribal communities where they have vast amounts of land, but they don't have large tribal memberships, where they're crafting their law and order codes to open up for non-native partners that, you know, want to have good farming practices to come on and get licensed, to get permits, to have access to water rights, to have access to the tribal tax structures to do their businesses in. And so
of course they do.
Yeah, and my job is to, you know, educate the outside communities that tribes are wonderful places to do business with. You know, if you have shared cultures and values, then it's definitely a great move forward, because it's mutually beneficial. And then that starts to, you know, break away from the reality that many of our tribal communities, we always suffer from the burdens, but we very rarely see the benefits of things. And that's been happening pretty much since, you know, the Nina Pinta and Santa Maria arrived here, is that whole benefits and burdens, you know, scale. We can bring that back into balance. And that just takes, you know, I mean, it takes work, and we're doing the work. I mean, every generation has been doing the work, because we started off on not so great of a foot. But how many times have you heard, Chris, in your lifetime, that people have said, I never would have thought that I would have seen it legalized in my life? and you're hearing that from like even like people of my generation, because I know that I've heard people say that. I know I've probably even said that just because of the reefer madness that existed. And so, we're able to move the dial forward with other things like integration of psilocybin as a healing medicine, where, I mean, as a young girl growing up, I was so scared of anything psychedelic because we had this man in our community that went on a really bad acid trip. And everybody, like, we grew up here, and that's what happens if you do drugs, and everybody would kind of point out to this man in the community of the shining example. And so, like, even smoking weed was like a little bit later in life kind of a thing, because it was, even in a family that was very accepting and very open, it was, I mean, definitely wasn't pushed on, but it wasn't ever kept away from it, meaning like I had access. I mean, I've been consuming cannabis since in utero. My mother smoked full term, the entire pregnancy with myself and all of my brothers and sisters. And we're all very productive members of society. I've never had my IQ tested, and I probably don't ever really want to, because that's just a scary test in general. And I hate tests. I get test anxiety.
Well,
but I do know that,
what does the IQ test really test anyway?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I could tell you. I can tell you what it tests. It tests the kind of things that white students learn when they're kids, and they're drilled, and they learn spelling, and they learn arithmetic, and then they call that IQ. They call that intellectual quotient or intelligence quotient. That's not really what it is. Of course, that's vocabulary tests and arithmetic tests, right? So don't.
And that's what I have to do. That's what I do even with my balance in my own family system, because my son, there's areas that he struggles with in school, does great in math, and some of these other areas where it just makes me really proud, but he's struggling in social studies. And I think about what it's like to be an 8th grader learning, like world history and things like that as a young Indigenous boy who's already been out. I mean, he's been to buffalo country. He's helped process and harvest a buffalo, I mean, he's been on a very sacred path. And he's been a provider, and he's since a very young age has learned so much, but I could tell that it was just really beating his spirit down, and I being, as a policy analysts working specifically in education, know a lot of that, how that machismo factor plays along, especially in that age range, with educators themselves. And so I had to tell him things that would allow him to have compassion for his teacher, to not be hostile or feel any kind of resentment towards his teacher.
Is the teacher a white person?
Yes. It's just really frustrated that my son just doesn't understand this really US history based stuff. And he can't memorize it and regurgitate it on paper.
Well, I don't know. There's raising kids is a whole other conversation. We could spend a couple hours on pretty easily. I'm thinking, but I don't know. And also middle school, also 8th grade, middle school. It's the worst.
Fast forward, yeah.
I don't know. I recall. So when I was in about 10th grade, was when I first started really having my own thoughts and doing my own research. And in fact, I had a social studies paper, and we didn't have any really restrictions on what we could write on. We could write on anything sort of historic. And I was the only one in the class who wrote on Indian removal. And I started with your people and learning about Chief Joseph and about Chief Lookingglass at first, and no one else knew what I was talking about. And I would tell them these stories like, you guys won't believe this stuff. They're like, I don't know. And I included your tribe, I included the Cherokee tribe, and I included the Apache, I believe was the third, and just in this paper that I worked on. But
wow.
It was a revelation, because of course it's not what's taught, right? It's not what's taught generally. It's not in the textbooks. None of it was in the textbooks at all. So that was the beginning of my awakening and my kind of journey through understanding better what had happened. So perhaps maybe just say that was in 10th grade. So it's soon for your son, whereas he starts to, it's your son, I'm sorry, your son or nephew?
Yeah, my son.
Son, it's soon where he starts to get a little more freedom to actually look into whatever draws him or pushes him toward, So just keep going. He'll be fine.
Well, he's my second. I have a 19-year-old also. So
Okay.
I've made it through the trenches with the teenage boys. My daughter, she's basically parenting me. She's 8 and
Okay.
just super fabulous. And she's
She's the boss.
my grown up.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's wonderful. Is there anything else that that you would like to cover? That anything that I haven't remembered to ask, or not even didn't know to ask? Anything else that you're working on that you'd like to share? Because this will be broadcast out, and people will. I mean, I'm sure people are dying to know what you're doing and what things are working on, and what things are working for you.
Well, I would love for people to check out our website at indigenouscannabiscoalition.com, because through there you can follow us through our social networks. You can download all copies of THC Magazine for free in a PDF download, find ways
Wow.
to support the work that we're doing. And that's just the channel to stay tuned. I mean, we showcase some of the events that we go to, through the pictures. We'll be starting to warehouse our oral stories through MP4 files on there as well.
Oh, okay.
But the biggest work ahead that I'm really excited, and a lot of the work that we do, it's not for necessarily the preservation of quantitative data, because I'm more of a qualitative data kind of gal. However, I do see a huge need for it because, well, it's just, I'm doing the work already. I might as well continue to warehouse it. And so when we started THC Magazine, the second issue, we did Indigenous women in hemp and cannabis. And in that issue was the first one where we showcased our partnership with Erin Carpella with Tribal Nations Map Series. And we came out with our first one, and it's going to be in the centerfold of all issues moving forward. Proprietary feature of THC Magazine is this gorgeous map that we started to showcase all of the tribally owned and operated dispensaries across the nation.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We have the wonderful THC map that, there you go. Like I said, it's got the logos of all of these amazing dispensaries on it. And then through the map, we've been able to also, showcase a directory. So you can go see the map, the corresponding logos and tribes are in our Tribal Nations dispensary. That's great for a print publication, but that doesn't reach the masses. And so we're working with a First Nations company, Mary Jane's Pure Cure, and we're going to be taking the Red Nations dispensary map, and we're just going to be taken down the border, and we're going to be integrating the tribal nations in the lower 48, and then working to identify any Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian owned and operated dispensaries as well to eventually integrate into the map. So that's all for like digital app. We're going to have that to where people will be able to download it. We'll be able to have some more premium add value for our tribes. Super cool. But for me, I love print. And so I want us to be able to have people to access this for their home. And then every year we're going to be publishing a poster size map. And so we're working on fine tuning the last of our data mining to get all of the dispensaries that are open and operated right now. The reason that it's been so hard is like the Picayune Rancheria of Chuck Chauncey in California near Fresno. I had no idea that they were even opening a dispensary until after it was open, and it was, through social media. I was like, oh, another tribal dispensary. Sometimes I find out about them opening on the front end, like before they've even broken ground. And sometimes I find out about it, through the ribbon cutting ceremony. That also kind of helps me inform me on how to work a little bit, more with tribes on the media marketing side of it, because sometimes they'll open and nobody even knows that they're open, and they're not, that's just not out there. They're not even on Leaf Maps or on Leafly, because it's just such a small scale startup. We want to blow them up. Yeah. It takes money. And so we can utilize the resources that we have now. I've got a wonderful network of cannabis publishers that love to push out Indigenous cannabis stories across the nation.
All right. Well, count me as another one. Count me as another one, and I'm happy to help. I'm building my platform out as well, social media, the whole, the same stuff you're doing. But if we can help each other, I'm more than happy to. So you and I will have plenty of time to talk together. Good.
Well, you already are by just sharing your audience, and I just appreciate everybody listening to wild and wacky startup story of Tribal Hemp and Cannabis Magazine, as
Fabulous.
the work of the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition. And I do still feel like we're in utero. There's still very much, until federal legalization happens, and states like Idaho, have a level playing field in a free market economy, then, we'll still continue to be shackled as a society.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say this. One of the things I've been thinking about recently is what is my show about, really? Like, what am I trying to do here? And talking with you actually really helps to really clarify it much better. And I've been talking with our mutual friend Sun Ra about this and trying to really sort of perfect the language. But everybody these days seems to sort of be on a team. They're on the Republican team, Democrat team, the blah blah blah. There's everyone's got a team. They all got a reason to fight. And cannabis is the opposite, I think, right? Which is it's the reason why all those other teams sort of dissolve and it brings you together, right? So, I mean, the worst possible trite way to say it is we're like on the green team. So I'm just going to say it once and leave it and forget it. But cannabis goes past all those barriers, right? Whether it's age, gender, geography, ethnicity, all those barriers that are kind of in our heads and made up, whatever, that those all disappear because we relate, all of us, to the plant. Even on a biological and cellular level with the endocannabinoid system, et cetera, like all of us are actually one in this sense, right?
Yes,
so,
that's how
anyway, that's my soapbox on that one.
She is a unifier for sure.
That's what she is, yeah. So incredible. I know you're so busy and I so appreciate your time. And I so appreciate you just spending the time to talk with me. And I hope that I allowed you to, share what you wanted to with the audience and get your message out there as much as possible.
I definitely did. I've had a wonderful time on your show, and just I'm really excited just about today in general. I've had a lot of strange occurrences happen today. One of them being that I just got my ancestry profile back today.
Really?
So for you to share the connection that you did earlier, with knowing the chief that I descend from as, one of the top signatories of the Nez Perce Treaty of 1855, and then to actually see the results of that blood connection and and then the connections that it's opened up to see all of my relatives, those that I've known of, that, I'm like, oh, all these cousins that are signed up for the ancestry. But my ethnicity estimate has just it's created a more of an emotional space for me today than I had even anticipated. Because I was one of those, how there's those anti-vaxxers out there and everybody's like anti this or that. I was anti-DNA. I was like, I'm not giving up any of my, biological, excrement to send it off to some company. And then the more that I learned and the more that the curiosity grew within me, I decided to do it. So I just wanted to shout out that I love today because it just reaffirms my roots and my connections way more than I even knew. And it answers questions about other parts of me that I had no idea about.
Oh, well, I mean this sincerely. You have so much to be proud of from your lineage. And so again, another reason why it's my honor to have you here today. I really do feel like you're royalty as well. And it's really wonderful to have you here. So it's been an incredible experience. Thank you so much, Mary Jane.